the difference between like passive business people versus active business people. And there's, what's so cool about door-to-door, and when I consult a lot of companies, they don't have a door-to-door program. They're like, oh, we just do leads, or we're buy leads, or we have online sales, or we get referrals. And I'm like, that's so passive. The gritty are the active, the proactive that say, I don't have anything on the calendar. I make shit happen. When you're up to nothing, nothing is usually next. I love that. That's a Matthew McConaughey from the book, Green Lights. And then I want to dive into this treadmill principle. So Will Smith, he said, if we get on a treadmill together, there's two things. You get off first, or I'm going to die. It's really simple. And I love this principle because Harvard Business Study, George Valiant, he said, put treadmill steep and fast for 5 minutes, and it took 130 sophomores in college and had them run on it. So they said, okay, we're going to put it super steep and go 5 minutes fast and see what happens to these sophomores. And some quit within a minute. Some lasted the 5 minutes. But the average lasted about 4 minutes. And he said then they followed them for 2 years, for every 2 years for 60 years. And this is cool. I love studies where they literally took sample sizes for years. And they said, we're going to play the long game on these studies. And so those that lasted longer had more success in all life categories, which is crazy. So Angela Duckworth in the book Grit, so if you've read the book, it's a phenomenal book. She says, what if they could have opened up the option for people to come back the next day to try it again and see how many actually came back? Then let them try it over and over again. Because there's a lot of people that maybe quit in 60 seconds and you're like, hey, do you want to give it another shot? And there's an element of grit. That would have been a true measure of grit. Because when you don't come back the next day, you permanently turn your back on a commitment. Your effort plummets to zero. As a consequence, your skills stop to improve. And at the same time, you stop producing anything with whatever skill you have. And it's that anxiously engaged in a good cause and the willingness to say, I'm going to do it again despite getting knocked down. And I watch and train and I work with a lot of business owners down to the first-year sales reps. And just to watch their defeat after doors when I go shadow them, or to see business owners kind of be like, oh, this didn't work, so nothing's ever going to work. And it's like getting in that trap. I'm like, dude, where's the grit, man? Like that's like the whole struggle is the process. Like you need that. And then you get into what we call momentum. And momentum begets momentum. And the way that, and the best ways to start is to start. So momentum begets momentum, and the best ways to start is start. That's by Gil Penchina. And it's not about speed, it's about momentum. And if you think, like when you reframe like big days, think of like a big selling day. You're like, oh, I got 6 today, but then the next 3 days you don't sell. Like for me, I'm like, that's when you're just racing to go get a 6 spot, or you're like, oh, it's all due to luck, the area, and you're now blaming external factors of why you're successful. And I'm like, no. It's can you get in a rhythm to create momentum? And then are you able to say no to all the pulls and all the distractions of people that are going to take you out of this momentum, and have discipline to say, I'm in flow state, don't mess with me. I'm in flow state, don't mess with me, I'm grinding. And oftentimes there's just so many things that pull us and distract us out of flow state. So it's like we've all heard the easiest time to get a sale is right after a sale. And so often people get in the mindset of, I get one sale and I go home. I'm a one and done kind of guy. And I challenge you to be, I get a sale, I go to another sale, and I go to another sale, and I leapfrog my sales because I'm using the momentum of my attitude and my positivity and my success to then carry into the energy of my next transaction. So if we are always jumping into different opportunities, I promise you're not going to be successful. So think about it. I have a friend named Ralphie, and he's been struggling for years to find successful, like financial success, in his late 20s. And the problem is it's like he's lived in 5 different states over the last 6 years. He's gone to 6 different companies, tried out all these different MLMs, to door-to-door companies, to side hustles, to e-commerce. And I'm just like, whoa, settle in, make a commitment, and just put your head down and grind. And it's almost like the fear of picking a skill and running with it. They're like, he's like, I want to have all these skills. I want to be good at e-commerce, and I want to be good at this, and I want to be good at this. And I'm like, no, the gritty is the willingness to do the boring thing over and over and over again to develop a skill that's going to pay dividends. That's what grit is. And it's, how many times do professional athletes squat? It's like, okay, is there any more creative ways to work out? No, it's just a simple exercise called squatting. Nobody likes leg day, but we do it because that's what we do. And I think too often we just think we can replace the true principle called the 10,000 hour rule by Malcolm Gladwell. And that is a fact. And if you only put 1,000 hours in here and 2,000 hours in there and 500 hours in here and 50 hours in there, you're not going to be successful. You didn't gain any real life skills. So to become a master and to get real paid, real big bucks, stay in the farm and the soil in which you started. Meaning, I go to a farm, I get a big plot, I till the ground, I plant the seeds, and then I bounce and I go start farming somewhere else. And it's like, well, that was dumb. You never even saw the harvest. Or you're like, okay, I got a great crop of corn this year. And then the next year you're like, well, let's just try potatoes. You're like, no, it takes time to master the crop of corn, and you've got to develop, okay, how do you do it, and how do you plant it, and how do you, and you're fixing the fertilization and the timing of when you plant it, and you get really good at creating the corn. You don't just like, all right, let's try raspberries now. You're just like, no. So some people get stuck in this almost like exploratory phase. So think of it as like I'm always exploring, and they might be 40, 50 years old and they're still trying to figure it out. They're like, well, I don't know what I want to do with my life. I'm like, well, how about maybe the career path, maybe your job is going to change, but what's the skill set that you develop that people will pay you gladly for? And so developing these skill sets is going to then make you always marketable. And like in door-to-door sales, for example, they never really got good at it. And then I'm like, okay, your pattern that you're training yourself is to just get okay at things and always can make okay money, instead of saying, I'm going to commit to being really good at this so that I can use these life skills into other things if I were to move on. And I think that like too often we fail to grasp that concept. So I'd invite you to practice grit. So these are just a few key principles of saying, okay, grit is the ability to endure and come back even though things are tough. And I'm reading this book, Anti-Fragile, right now, and it's so good. And humans are meant to be anti-fragile. So the opposite of fragile, most people would say, is robust, strong, things like that. But it's like, that would be the equivalent of saying the opposite of positive is neutral. And I'm like, no, the opposite of positive isn't neutral. It's negative. Like it's a minus. There's a plus and a minus. So the opposite of fragile would be minus fragility, anti-fragile, which then would be when we break things so they're easily broken. So anti-fragile would be when you break things, it actually gets stronger. Like it actually goes in reverse. There's a negative effect. It gets better. And humans are meant to be challenged and put under stress and really have struggle. And I'd invite you to ask, am I embracing the suck? Am I comfortable with the uncomfortable? And am I willing to play the game of grit? Or do I give up way too easy? So I know that things are tough. It's like it's almost August. And some of you guys are in the summer. You're right there in the last stretch. And this is where the difference between the boys and the men is, the 30 seconds on the treadmill versus the 5 minutes on a treadmill. And if you're like, well, I don't ever want to knock doors again, I'm done, I'm just trying to coast it out. Like my advice to you would be simply this. How else will that show up in the rest of your life if you just coast it out? If you committed to a full summer, then finish out the freaking full summer. Do the real work, because whether you do this again or not, you're never going to regret putting 100% in instead of just being like, this isn't for me, I hate this, I'm done. Because that is a reflection of how you probably show up in the rest of your life, whether that's in your relationships, whether that's in other business ventures, whether that's in finance. And this is the opportunity to break that pattern and really practice grit and be good at it, and it's deliberate practice.